In the annals of scientific inquiry, few experiments have challenged our understanding of addiction as profoundly as the Rat Park study. Conducted in the late 1970s by psychologist Bruce Alexander and his team at Simon Fraser University, this groundbreaking research sought to investigate the impact of environment on drug-seeking behavior in rats. The results were nothing short of astonishing, upending the prevailing narrative of addiction as a purely chemical and biological phenomenon. Prior to Rat Park, the dominant view held that addiction was an inevitable consequence of exposure to addictive substances. This belief stemmed largely from studies conducted on isolated rats confined to cramped, barren cages. These rats, when offered a choice between water and morphine-laced water, consistently chose the drug, often to the point of self-destruction. This led researchers to conclude that the drug itself was the sole driver of addiction. However, Alexander questioned the validity of these findings. He argued that the sterile and isolating conditions of the cages failed to account for the complex social and environmental factors that influence behavior in both rats and humans. To test his hypothesis, he created Rat Park, a spacious and stimulating environment that more closely resembled a rat's natural habitat. Rat Park was a veritable rodent paradise, complete with ample food and water, cozy nesting materials and, most importantly, opportunities for social interaction and play. Rats in Rat Park could socialize, mate and explore their surroundings, mimicking the rich social lives they would experience in the wild. The findings were revolutionary. Rats in Rat Park showed significantly less interest in the morphine-laced water compared to their isolated counterparts. This suggested that the environment played a crucial role in the development of addictive behaviors. Alexander's work challenged the prevailing notion that addiction was solely a result of chemical hooks in drugs. Instead, it highlighted the importance of social and environmental factors, opening new avenues for understanding and treating addiction. The results of the Rat Park experiment were groundbreaking and challenged the prevailing notions of addiction. Alexander and his team found that rats living in the enriched environment of Rat Park consumed significantly less morphine than their counterparts confined to the isolated cages, which was a stark contrast to the behavior observed in the isolated rats. Even when given easy access to the drug, the rats in Rat Park showed little interest in the morphine-laced water. This suggested that addiction was not simply a matter of exposure to drugs, but rather a complex interplay of biological, psychological and social factors, indicating that the environment played a crucial role in the development of addictive behaviors. Despite its profound implications, the Rat Park experiment was met with skepticism and resistance from the scientific community, who were hesitant to accept findings that contradicted long-held beliefs. The prevailing paradigm of addiction as a purely biological disease was deeply entrenched, and many researchers were reluctant to embrace a more nuanced perspective that included environmental and social factors. The study's methodology was also questioned, with some critics arguing that the differences in drug consumption could be attributed to factors other than the environment, such as the rats' individual differences or the novelty of the enriched environment. The pharmaceutical industry, which had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, also played a role in downplaying the significance of Rat Park as it threatened their business model. The idea that addiction could be mitigated by addressing social and environmental factors threatened the lucrative market for addiction treatment medications, which were heavily promoted by pharmaceutical companies. It was far more profitable to focus on individual solutions, such as medication-assisted treatment, than to address the systemic issues that contribute to addiction, such as poverty, social isolation, and lack of community support. As a result, the Rat Park experiment, despite its compelling findings, remained largely ignored for decades, buried under the weight of the dominant addiction paradigms and commercial interests. It was not until the late 20th and early 21st centuries, as the limitations of the purely biological model of addiction became increasingly apparent, that the study began to receive the recognition it deserved, sparking renewed interest in the role of environment and social factors in addiction. The Rat Park experiment offered compelling evidence that social connection plays a crucial role in mitigating drug-seeking behavior. Rats living in the enriched environment of Rat Park, with ample opportunities for social interaction and play, were far less likely to consume morphine than their isolated counterparts. This finding suggests that social connection acts as a powerful buffer against addiction. Several factors contribute to this protective effect. First, social interaction releases endorphins, the body's natural feel-good chemicals. These endorphins provide a sense of pleasure and well-being, reducing the need to seek these sensations from external sources such as drugs. Second, social connection fosters a sense of belonging and purpose. When individuals feel connected to others and have a sense of community, they are less likely to turn to drugs as a way to cope with loneliness, isolation, or lack of meaning in their lives. Third, social support provides individuals with the resilience and coping mechanisms they need to navigate life's challenges without resorting to substance use. When people have strong social networks, they are more likely to have access to emotional support, practical assistance, and a sense of hope during difficult times. The findings of the Rat Park experiment have profound implications for our understanding of addiction in humans. They suggest that simply focusing on the individual and their drug use is insufficient. We must also address the social and environmental factors that contribute to addiction. Section 4. Beyond the Cage, the Rat Park Experiment and the Human Mirror. While the Rat Park experiment focused on rats, its findings have profound implications for understanding human addiction. Just like the rats in the experiment, humans are social creatures with an innate need for connection, belonging, and purpose. When these needs are met, we thrive. When they are not, we suffer. The parallels between the rats in the isolated cages and humans struggling with addiction are striking. Both groups often experience chronic stress, isolation, and a lack of control over their environment. These factors create a breeding ground for addiction, as individuals turn to drugs as a way to cope with their pain, numb their emotions, and escape their reality. Consider the lives of many individuals battling addiction. They often come from backgrounds of trauma, abuse, neglect, or poverty. They may struggle with mental health issues, lack access to adequate health care, or face discrimination and marginalization. These experiences create a profound sense of disconnection and despair, making them more vulnerable to the allure of drugs and alcohol. The Rat Park experiment reminds us that addiction is not simply a personal failing or a moral weakness. It is a complex phenomenon rooted in both individual and societal factors. By understanding the role that social environment plays in addiction, we can move beyond simplistic explanations and develop more compassionate and effective approaches to prevention and treatment. Section 5. Society's Grip: How Culture Shapes Our Addictive Behaviors. While individual factors undoubtedly contribute to addiction, we cannot ignore the powerful influence of society and culture in shaping our relationship with drugs and addictive behaviors. The environment we live in, the media we consume, and the social circles we move in all play a part in molding our attitudes and behaviors towards substances. From the advertising that bombards us daily to the social norms that dictate acceptable levels of consumption, our environment plays a significant role in either promoting or mitigating addiction. The constant exposure to substance use in media and social settings can desensitize us to the risks and consequences associated with it. Consider the ubiquitous presence of alcohol in our society. It is not just a beverage, but a cultural symbol, often associated with celebration, relaxation, and social bonding. It is readily available, heavily marketed, and often seen as an integral part of social gatherings and celebrations. This omnipresence can blur the lines between moderate and excessive consumption. This normalization of alcohol consumption can make it challenging for individuals to recognize when their relationship with alcohol has become problematic. The social acceptance of drinking can mask the signs of dependency and addiction. Similarly, the pharmaceutical industry's influence on healthcare has led to the overprescription of opioid painkillers, contributing to the current opioid epidemic. The trust placed in medical professionals can sometimes lead to an underestimation of the addictive potential of these medications. The aggressive marketing of these drugs, coupled with a lack of emphasis on alternative pain management strategies, has created a perfect storm for addiction. The focus on quick fixes rather than long-term solutions exacerbates the problem. Moreover, societal inequalities such as poverty, discrimination, and lack of access to education and employment opportunities create environments of chronic stress and despair, making individuals more susceptible to addiction. These conditions foster a sense of hopelessness that can drive people towards substance use as an escape. When people feel hopeless, marginalized, and lacking control over their lives, they are more likely to turn to drugs as a way to cope. The lack of support systems and resources further compounds their vulnerability. Addressing addiction requires us to look beyond individual behaviors and examine the broader social and cultural forces at play. It involves understanding the root causes and the systemic issues that contribute to substance abuse. By challenging the normalization of substance use, promoting healthy coping mechanisms, and addressing systemic inequalities, we can create communities that are more resilient to addiction. Building supportive environments and fostering a culture of wellness can make a significant difference in preventing and overcoming addiction.